Welcome back to the Pro Ticker Show, your Saturday edition covering major financial magazine headlines. It seems like everywhere you turn, people are talking about the housing market.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, you're right. It is a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks in real estate were hoping that 2024 would be a bounce back year after a pretty tough 2023.
Right.
The thinking was mortgage rates would go down, buyers would come back, and we'd see things pick up.
Yeah, there was definitely a moment of optimism this past summer, right?
Yeah,
I remember seeing headlines about mortgage rates dipping,
absolutely.
even hitting a 2-year low in September.
For a minute, their rates were getting close to 6%,
Right.
which felt like a breath of fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
But then even with that, dip rates were still pretty high for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially when you factor in that home prices in many areas haven't really budged much.
Right.
That combination is tough for anyone looking to buy.
Yeah.
And to make matters even more complicated, mortgage rates have actually bounced back up since then.
Oh.
They're now at their highest point in almost 3 months.
So we're back to seeing rates above 6.5% for a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Yeah.
Something we haven't seen since early August.
Mm-hmm.
What does this all mean for the housing market overall?
It paints a pretty stark picture.
Okay.
The prediction is that existing home sales are going to hit their lowest point since 1995.
Oh.
And that's for the second year in a row.
Oh, wow.
Think about that, 1995.
Yeah.
Back then, the internet was just starting to take off.
Right.
The U.S. population was significantly smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And the way people bought and sold homes was completely different.
Right.
To see this kind of slump now in 2024 really tells you how much things have shifted.
It's officially the worst 2-year stretch for the housing market since the mid-1990s.
It is.
I'm curious, though, about the impact on the broader economy.
Yeah.
We know the Federal Reserve has been trying to control inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Does this slowdown in housing actually help their efforts?
It does, actually. The housing market cooling down is a big part of the Fed's plan to moderate economic activity.
That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Increasing the cost of borrowing for homes is one of the most direct ways the Fed's actions affect people's everyday finances, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just individuals feeling it, it's the whole ripple effect.
Right.
Real estate businesses are hurting.
Yeah.
Mortgage lenders are seeing less activity.
Right.
And even related industries like furniture stores are feeling the pinch.
I see.
Less buying, less selling, less moving. It all adds up.
Oh, okay.
I was reading about a real estate agent in Phoenix who said, people are only moving if they absolutely have to.
Wow.
Showings are down, and there's a real feeling of stagnation in the market.
Wow. It sounds like a tough time to be in that business.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the numbers.
It is.
But hearing these stories from real people makes it so much more real.
Absolutely. There's a human side to all of this data.
Right.
I came across another story about a couple who've been trying to find a larger home since last year.
Okay.
And they've had to lower their budget and adjust their expectations because of those high prices and interest rates.
Wow.
It's a tough market to be a buyer in, that's for sure.
You mentioned existing home sales are down, but what about new homes?
Right.
Is there any sign of life in that part of the market?
There is, actually.
Okay.
It seems like builders are starting to get creative to attract buyers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Well, one strategy that's gaining traction is something called a rate buy-down.
Hold on, a rate buy down.
Yeah,
Can you explain what that is?
sure.
I'm not sure I've heard that term before.
It's essentially a way to temporarily lower the buyer's monthly mortgage payments
Okay.
to make the home more appealing.
Okay.
Let's say you're interested in a new home.
Right.
And the mortgage rate is currently at 6.5%.
Okay.
With a rate buy-down, the builder might offer to pay an upfront fee to the lender. In exchange for lowering your interest rate for a set period,
Okay.
maybe the first 2 years of your mortgage.
Okay.
So instead of 6.5%, you might get a rate of 5.5% for those initial 2 years.
So for those first 2 years, your monthly payments would be lower,
Yeah,
which could be a big help for your budget,
right.
especially with everything else costing so much these days.
Absolutely.
But then what happens?
After that initial period, your rate would adjust back up to the original 6.5%.
Okay.
It's a strategy that seems to be working for builders, though.
Interesting.
New home sales have actually gone up in the first 9 months of 2024 compared to last year.
Wow.
That's pretty significant,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you compare it to the 23% drop we're seeing in existing home sales compared to pre-pandemic levels.
It makes sense. New homes come without the baggage of previous owners.
Right.
They often have the latest features and amenities.
Uh-huh.
And with these rate buy downs,
Yeah.
builders are making them even more attractive to buyers.
Exactly.
I wonder, though, if this is just delaying a bigger financial burden down the road for buyers who opt for rate buydowns.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It's important for anyone considering a rate buydown to understand the long-term implications
Right.
and make sure it truly aligns with their financial goals.
Okay, so some movement in the new home market, but existing homes are struggling.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for potential buyers out there, or should they just sit tight and wait?
Well, there might be some light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay.
The Fed recently cut short-term interest rates,
Right.
and most experts think they'll make further cuts later this year.
Okay.
This could eventually lead to lower mortgage rates overall,
Mm.
making homes more affordable.
So there's a chance things could improve.
Uh-huh.
But for now, it sounds like the dream of homeownership is slipping further out of reach for many people.
It's definitely a challenging time.
Hmm.
Even with potential rate cuts on the horizon, the industry is now saying a full market turnaround probably won't happen until 2025 because those high rates we saw in the first half of this year really threw things off.
And let's not forget about the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
the 2024 presidential election.
Right.
I can only imagine how much that could shake things up.
Absolutely. Depending on who wins, we could see some very different policies that could impact the housing market.
Right.
Some economists think one candidate's proposals could lead to higher inflation and interest rates,
Yeah.
which would obviously affect people's ability to buy homes.
So much uncertainty.
It is.
I guess the big question is, what mortgage rate would it actually take to get people moving again?
Right?
To get those who are sitting on the fence to finally take the plunge?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. Is there even a magic number out there?
And to answer it, we need to understand the mindset of homeowners right now.
Hmm.
Remember, millions of Americans bought or refinanced their homes when mortgage rates were incredibly low back in 2020 and 2021.
Oh, yeah. Those were the days.
Yeah.
3% interest rates.
Yeah,
Now it feels like a distant memory.
it really does. And those low rates are a key part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
For example, imagine a $500,000 mortgage.
Okay.
At today's rate of 6.5%, you're looking at a monthly payment that's over $1,000 higher than it would have been at 3%.
Wow. Over $1,000 more a month?
It is.
That's a huge difference.
And it means many people who bought or refinanced back then couldn't even afford to buy their own home in today's market,
Right.
let alone upgrade to something bigger.
Wow.
They're essentially stuck because of those low mortgage rates.
So they're trapped in a golden cage of sorts.
Yeah.
They have these great rates, but they can't really move without facing a significant financial hit.
Exactly. And this creates a ripple effect.
Right.
Because if people aren't selling, it limits the inventory available for buyers.
Mm.
And with fewer homes on the market, prices stay high, making it even tougher for those who are trying to buy.
It's like a vicious cycle.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And a recent survey revealed that 70% of homeowners and renters said the highest mortgage rate they would even consider is 5.49% or lower.
Wow. That's pretty telling. People are really feeling the pressure of these high rates.
They are, and it highlights just how much the definition of affordable has changed in just a few short years.
It's a reminder that the housing market doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
It's connected to interest rates, the economy, politics, and, of course, real people's lives and finances.
Absolutely.
People are having to make some tough decisions right now.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about dreams of homeownership, the stress of rising costs, and the difficult choices people are having to make.
Yeah.
I was talking to a couple who decided to rent this year instead of buying, even though they were ready to make the move.
Wow.
The costs associated with homeownership are just too daunting for them right now.
Right.
They're putting the money they would have spent on a mortgage into the stock market instead.
It's fascinating how people are adapting and finding alternative ways to build wealth.
It really is, and it speaks to the broader economic forces at play.
It's a reminder that the housing market is deeply intertwined with the overall health of the economy. When things are good, people feel more confident about making big purchases like homes.
Right.
But when there's uncertainty or fear of a recession, people tend to hold back.
Exactly. And right now we're seeing a mix of signals.
Yeah.
On the one hand, the job market remains strong and consumer spending is still relatively healthy.
Right.
But on the other hand, inflation is stickier than the Fed would like. And there are concerns about a potential slowdown on the horizon.
It's like we're trying to read the tea leaves.
It is.
looking for clues about what's coming next.
And unfortunately, there's no crystal ball that can tell us for sure what the future holds.
Right.
But what we can do is stay informed,
Right.
monitor the key economic indicators,
Right.
and be prepared to adjust our plans as needed.
Okay, let's move on.
It's a tricky landscape to navigate, that's for sure. It seems like everyone's trying to figure out what the smart move is right now.
Exactly. So much of this boils down to those individual decisions people are grappling with.
Yeah,
Are they better off buying, renting, or waiting it out?
you're right. It's about assessing your personal situation,
Mm-hmm.
your risk tolerance, and even your emotional comfort level.
Right.
Some people are wired to jump into the market,
Right.
while others are more cautious.
Speaking of those who are ready to take the leap, we talked about the new home market earlier
Yeah,
and how builders are using rate buydowns to attract buyers.
right.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
Let's say you find a new home you love,
Okay.
and the builder offers a rate buydown.
Okay.
What they're essentially doing is paying an upfront fee to the lender
Okay.
to temporarily lower your interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the current rate is 6.5%.
Okay.
The builder might buy down your rate to, say, 5.5% for the first 2 years of your mortgage.
So those first 2 years, you'd have a lower monthly payment,
Right.
which could make a big difference in your budget,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're stretching to afford the home.
Exactly. And that can be enough to tip the scales for some buyers.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that after those 2 years, your rate would adjust back up to that original 6.5%.
It seems like a good deal on the surface, but are there any potential downsides for buyers to be aware of?
That's a great question. Rate buydowns can be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not a magic solution.
Okay.
One thing to consider is whether you'll be able to afford that higher payment when the rate adjusts back up.
Okay.
Also, keep in mind that you might end up paying more in interest over the life of the loan
Right.
because you're essentially delaying some of the interest payments to later years.
It's a bit like kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
In a way, yes, it's about weighing the pros and cons
Right.
and deciding if a rate buydown makes sense for your specific circumstances.
So we've got existing home sales, struggling new home sales, getting a boost from these rate buydowns. And then there's that whole other group of people who are opting to rent instead of buying altogether.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how each segment of the market is responding to these unusual conditions.
It highlights the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to housing.
Yeah.
What's right for one person might not be right for another.
Right.
It depends on your individual goals,
Yeah.
your financial situation, your risk tolerance, and even your lifestyle preferences.
So what advice would you give to people who are feeling overwhelmed by all of this information and are just trying to make sense of the housing market?
My first piece of advice would be to focus on your local market, not
Okay.
just the national headlines.
Right.
Talk to local real estate agents, do your research, and get a sense of what's happening in your specific area. Things can vary widely from one city to the next, even within the same state.
That's such good advice.
Yeah.
What else should people keep in mind?
Be realistic about your budget and your expectations.
Okay.
This isn't the time to stretch yourself thin financially.
Right.
Don't get caught up in bidding wars or feel pressured to buy something you're not comfortable with.
And if you're feeling lost or unsure, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Exactly. There are so many resources available,
Mhm.
from financial advisors to real estate agents to mortgage brokers. They can help you understand the complexities of the market and make informed decisions that align with your goals.
It's about finding the right support system to guide you through this journey.
You're right, even though it's a challenging market.
Mhm.
Remember that we've been through cycles like this before.
Yeah,
The housing market has its ups and downs, and things will eventually stabilize.
that's reassuring to hear. It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom,
Yeah,
but it's important to remember that this too shall pass.
absolutely. In the meantime, focus on what you can control.
Mm-hmm.
Your finances, your research, and your decision-making process.
So as we look ahead, what are some key things people should be watching for in the coming months?
Keep a close eye on interest rate trends, of course.
Right.
Any movement by the Fed will have a ripple effect on mortgage rates.
Right.
Also, pay attention to what's happening with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
If inflation starts to cool down, that could be a good sign for the housing market.
And what about the political landscape? How much could the election outcome impact things?
It's definitely a wild card.
Mhm.
Different candidates have different economic policies.
Right.
And those policies could have a significant impact on interest rates, inflation, and ultimately the housing market.
Yeah.
It's hard to predict exactly what will happen, but it's something to be aware of.
So much uncertainty swirling around.
Yeah,
It's a lot for anyone to process.
it is. But amidst all of this uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
there are still opportunities out there for those who are prepared and informed.
Okay.
It's about approaching the market strategically, making smart decisions and not letting fear paralyze you.
Yeah. Well said. Knowledge is power, especially in a market as dynamic as this one.
Exactly. The more you understand about the forces at play, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the challenges and make the most of the opportunities that arise.
Speaking of challenges, we've talked a lot about the struggles buyers are facing.
Yeah,
But what about the rental market?
that's a great point. The rental market is facing its own set of pressures,
Mm-hmm.
with rising rents making it increasingly difficult for people to save for a down payment.
It's like a catch-22.
Yeah,
Rents are so high that it's hard to save enough to buy.
right.
But buying is also expensive because of high prices and interest rates.
Exactly. Many renters are caught in this cycle,
Okay.
effectively priced out of both the rental market and the homeownership market.
It sounds like a pretty bleak situation for a lot of people.
It can be, but it's important to remember that there are resources available to help renters navigate these challenges.
Okay.
There are programs that offer rental assistance, and there are organizations that provide financial counseling and guidance on budgeting and saving.
So even though it's a tough market, there are still options and support systems available to help people find safe and affordable housing.
Absolutely. It's about knowing where to look for help and not giving up on your goals, whether those goals involve renting or owning a home.
And as we mentioned earlier, it's important to focus on your local market and understand the specific challenges and opportunities that exist in your area.
Exactly. The housing market is a complex ecosystem.
Right.
And it's constantly evolving.
Right.
What's true today might not be true tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So stay informed, stay adaptable,
Right.
and don't be afraid to ask for help along the way.
It's about finding the right resources and support to guide you through this journey.
You're right. And even though there's a lot of uncertainty in the housing market right now, remember that you're not alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of people are facing similar challenges, and there are people and organizations dedicated to helping you find solutions.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the housing market, what's the one key takeaway you want listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and be proactive.
Okay.
Do your research, understand the factors that are influencing the market,
Mm-hmm.
and make informed decisions that align with your personal circumstances and goals.
Right.
Whether you're buying, selling, or renting, knowledge is power in the housing market.
That's great advice. And on that note, I think it's time for us to move on to the next topic.
It's a fascinating and complex topic, that's for sure.
It is.
The housing market is a reflection of so many things happening in the world, from economic trends to social shifts to political decisions. It's all interconnected.
It really is. And I think that's what makes it so compelling for people.
Uh-huh.
It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about the hopes and dreams people have for their lives and their families.
You're absolutely right. Owning a home has always been a big part of the American dream. And even though the path to homeownership is looking a bit different these days,
Yeah.
that dream is still alive and well for many people.
But for others, it feels like that dream is slipping further and further out of reach.
It's true, the affordability crisis is real,
Mm-hmm.
and it's impacting people across the country.
Right.
Those who are already homeowners are feeling stuck because of the so-called golden handcuffs of low mortgage rates.
Right.
And those who are trying to buy are facing a perfect storm of high prices, high interest rates,
Yeah.
and limited inventory.
It's no wonder so many people are feeling discouraged or even defeated.
I understand that feeling, but I think it's important to remember that we've been through tough times before,
Right.
and we've always found a way to adapt and overcome.
Mm-hmm.
The housing market will eventually stabilize, and new opportunities will emerge.
It's a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the negativity,
Yeah,
but it's important to maintain a sense of perspective.
exactly. And in the meantime, it's about focusing on what you can control: your finances, your research, and your decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're aiming to buy a home, rent a place that meets your needs, or simply invest wisely in your future,
Right.
knowledge and preparation are key.
So for our listeners who are trying to make sense of all this,
Yeah.
what's the one piece of advice you'd leave them with?
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The housing market is constantly changing, so it's essential to keep learning, adapting, and seeking out the resources and support you need to make the best decisions for yourself and your family.
Let's move on to the next topic. It seems like the UK's new prime minister is really pushing to make the UK a global leader in AI. He's framing it as this huge opportunity, but there's a sense that not everyone's buying it.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to walk a tightrope. On the one hand, you have this ambitious vision being laid out, the UK as a global AI hub, but then on the other, there are these actions, or in some cases, inactions that seem to contradict that grand vision.
Right. It's giving some people in the tech industry whiplash. Like he gave this big speech at an investment summit all about how the UK needs to embrace AI, talking about its potential.
But then a short while ago, funding for a massive supercomputer project at Edinburgh University got completely scrapped. We're talking £800 million down the drain. That kind of move sends a chill through the entire sector. It makes you wonder about the government's actual commitment.
It's like, hey, come invest in UK AI. Oh, and by the way, we might pull the rug out from under you at any moment. I'm sure that's comforting to investors.
Not exactly. There's already a sense of uncertainty. And that kind of move just amplifies it. Investors need to see a clear, consistent strategy, not just grand pronouncements followed by budget cuts.
The Science and Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle, is trying to do damage control. He's saying the previous government overpromised and underdelivered, and that this administration is all about being realistic and responsible. He insists that under the new PM, any project they start will be fully funded and delivered on time.
It's a good talking point.
Yep.
But actions speak louder than words. The fear is that there's just a lot of talk about AI. But the concrete plans, the roadmap for how to get there, seems to be missing.
Speaking of missing plans, remember the AI bill that was supposed to be a centerpiece of the King's speech? Well, it got yanked at the last minute and replaced with the cybersecurity bill. It makes you wonder if AI really is as high of a priority as they're claiming.
The timing was certainly terrible. Cybersecurity is important, no doubt. But to make that switch right when everyone is looking for signs of the government's commitment to AI, it definitely fueled skepticism. Kyle says it was all about addressing vulnerabilities in the UK's networks. But it's hard not to see it as a red flag.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Kyle is actually trying to use the EU's approach to AI regulation to the UK's advantage. The EU is being pretty cautious, some might even say restrictive, with its AI regulations. And Kyle thinks that creates an opening for the UK.
It's a bold strategy for sure. The EU's approach embodied in their AI Act is built around a set of risk categories. AI systems deemed high risk, think things like law enforcement or healthcare, face much stricter requirements. It's designed to mitigate potential harms, but it also creates a lot of hurdles for companies working in those areas.
So Kyle's thinking is that the UK can position itself as the place to be for companies that want to innovate quickly without all that red tape, a kind of move fast and break things approach.
That's the bet they seem to be making. Attract the companies and talent looking for a less restrictive environment. It could pay off, especially if they can market themselves as a responsible alternative to the Wild West approach you see in some other parts of the world. But there are risks, too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
isn't there a risk that a less regulated approach could lead to problems down the line, ethical concerns, even potential harm?
Exactly. It's a classic dilemma. Fostering innovation versus ensuring responsible development of a powerful technology. And it's a debate that's happening globally, not just in the UK. But in this case, the UK is clearly betting on agility and a lighter touch. Only time will tell if that's enough to make them a true leader in AI.
And all of this is happening with the UK's upcoming budget looming. There are rumors swirling that Kyle's department could face some pretty hefty cuts, which would obviously undermine the government's supposed AI ambitions.
Budget cuts always send a signal. If they hit Kyle's department hard, it'll be tough to reconcile that with the rhetoric about making the UK a global AI powerhouse. It would raise serious questions about their priorities.
Okay, so we've got ambitious talk, but potentially contradictory actions. The government seems to be trying to have it both ways, touting innovation while potentially undercutting it with funding decisions and a hazy regulatory approach. It's no wonder there's skepticism in the tech industry. What does all of this actually mean for the UK's tech sector, for companies trying to operate in this environment?
It's a pivotal moment for them. The UK actually has a pretty strong foundation in AI research and development. They've got great universities, talented people, and a decent track record of innovation. But translating that into commercial success has been a challenge.
It's like they can create the seeds but can't seem to grow the full-fledged tree.
Exactly. That's the problem in a nutshell. And it's been a recurring theme. They excel at early-stage funding, proof-of-concept projects, that sort of thing. But then they often see their most promising companies get snapped up by the big players, usually in the US. It's what some people call the superstar company dilemma.
Okay, let's unpack this superstar company dilemma. Why does this keep happening? Is it a problem with the UK's investment culture? Are UK companies just not as ambitious? Or is there something else going on?
Well, it's a complex issue, but I think a big part of it comes down to funding and what we call exit opportunities. The US simply has a much larger pool of capital available for tech startups, especially in the later stages of growth. And they've got this whole ecosystem built around taking companies public or selling them for huge sums. It's like a giant magnet pulling talent and investment towards it.
So UK startups are essentially hitting a funding wall when they try to scale up. They can get seed funding,
Mm.
but when they need serious money to really grow, they
Yeah.
have to look elsewhere.
That's often the case. They might be able to secure a few £1 million in early rounds, but then they need tens or even hundreds of millions to really compete on a global scale. And that kind of capital is just much harder to come by in the UK. That's when US investors with their deeper pockets and bigger appetite for risk come knocking.
And these US investors aren't just offering money. They're offering access to a massive market, a network of experienced advisors, and a whole culture built around tech entrepreneurship. It's hard to compete with that.
Exactly. Silicon Valley, despite all its flaws, has a long history of attracting and absorbing promising companies from all over the world. And the UK has definitely lost its share of AI talent and innovation to that gravitational pull.
So is there anything the UK government can do to stem that tide, to keep those superstar companies from being lured away?
Yeah.
Or is it a losing battle?
Well, they're certainly trying. One thing they're focusing on is creating more opportunities for domestic investment. There's a lot of talk about creating a sovereign wealth fund specifically for tech to help those later stage companies get the funding they need without having to go hat in hand to Silicon Valley. They're also trying to make the UK a more attractive place for global tech talent to live and work with things like visa reforms and tax incentives.
But as we discussed earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty about their overall approach to AI, about whether they're truly committed to making this big push. They can't be helping matters right. I mean, who wants to invest in an environment where the rules are constantly changing and the government's commitment is unclear?
No, it definitely creates hesitation among investors. They want to see a clear and consistent strategy, not just slogans and grand pronouncements. They want to know that the government is in it for the long haul, that they're willing to make the tough decisions and stick to their plan.
So it sounds like the UK government is facing this incredibly complex challenge. They need to attract investment and talent, create a supportive regulatory environment, and convince the world that they're serious about AI. And they need to do it all while competing with the likes of the US and China, who are already pouring billions into AI research and development. It's a daunting task, to say the least.
It's an understatement to call it daunting. They face some serious headwinds, both domestically and internationally. It'll be fascinating to see how they navigate these complexities in the months and years ahead.
It's like they're trying to thread a needle. They need to attract investment and talent while also addressing concerns about responsible AI development, ethical considerations,
Yeah.
potential job displacement, all of that. And they need to do it all while facing intense competition from global superpowers with vast resources.
That's a very apt analogy. They're in a precarious position, but they do have some real strengths to build on. As we discussed, they have a strong research base, a vibrant tech community, and a history of innovation. If they can leverage those assets effectively, maybe they can carve out a space for themselves in this global AI landscape.
Maybe they can find a way to differentiate themselves, to focus on their unique strengths instead of trying to be a carbon copy of Silicon Valley.
That's an interesting thought. Perhaps they can position themselves as a leader in responsible AI development, focusing on ethical considerations, transparency, and human-centric design. That could be a way to attract investment and talent that aligns with those values.
It's a strategy worth considering, especially as concerns about the potential negative impacts of AI are growing.
Absolutely. There's a growing movement globally for ethical AI, for ensuring that this technology is developed and deployed in a way that benefits humanity. If the UK can position itself as a leader in that movement, it could be a winning strategy.
It's definitely something to watch. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the government's role, the challenges they face, the superstar company dilemma. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about what all of this actually means for the average person. Because let's be honest, most people aren't venture capitalists or tech CEOs. They're just trying to live their lives. So how does all of this AI stuff actually impact them?
That's a crucial question. AI is no longer just a futuristic concept. It's rapidly becoming integrated into our daily lives, often in ways we don't even realize. The decisions governments make about AI will have a profound impact on our society, on our jobs, our healthcare, our privacy, everything.
So this isn't just some abstract tech industry debate. It has real-world implications for all of us.
Absolutely. The development and deployment of AI will touch every aspect of our lives, from the mundane to the profound. It's already being used in everything from personalized recommendations on Netflix to diagnosing diseases to driving cars. And as AI becomes more powerful and more pervasive, its impact will only grow.
That's both exciting and a little bit daunting, right? I mean, on one hand, you have the potential for incredible advancements in healthcare, education, sustainability, you name it. But on the other hand, you have legitimate concerns about job displacement, algorithmic bias, even the potential for misuse in areas like surveillance or autonomous weapon systems.
It's a classic double-edged sword scenario, and it's precisely why we need to engage in informed discussions about AI, about its potential benefits and its potential risks. The choices we make today will shape the future of our world, and it's crucial that we make those choices with our eyes wide open.
That's why deep dives like this are so important. We need to understand these complex issues so we can participate in the conversation, so we can demand that our governments and the tech industry are accountable, that they're developing and deploying AI in a way that benefits humanity, not just profits.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to emerging technologies like AI. We need to be informed citizens so we can make informed decisions about our future, about the kind of world we want to live in.
Okay, so before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
hmm
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the superstar company dilemma.
hmm
It seems like the UK is really good at nurturing AI startups in their early stages, but then they often lose them to larger companies, usually in the US. I'm curious to hear more about why that happens. Is it just about money, or are there other factors at play?
Well, money is certainly a big part of it. As we discussed, the U.S. has a much larger pool of capital available for tech startups, especially in those later stage funding rounds where companies need hundreds of millions of dollars to really scale up. But it's more than just the raw amount of money available, it's also about the culture of investment.
What do you mean by culture of investment?
Well, in the US, there's a greater appetite for risk, a willingness to bet on companies that might not be profitable for years, even decades. There's also a deeper understanding of the tech industry, a network of experienced investors who have built and sold companies themselves. They speak the language of tech, they understand the challenges and opportunities, and they're more comfortable betting on companies that are pushing the boundaries.
So it's not just about the money. It's about the expertise, the network, the whole ecosystem that's built around tech entrepreneurship in the US.
Yeah,
And that's something that the UK, despite its strengths, is still trying to replicate.
exactly. The UK has made great strides in recent years. But they're still playing catch up in some ways, and that's a big part of why they struggle to keep those superstar companies from being lured away.
Okay, so let's say you're a promising AI startup in the UK.
Hmm.
You've got a great idea, a talented team, and some early traction, but you need a big infusion of cash to really take your business to the next level. What are your options?
Well, you can try to raise money from UK investors, but as we discussed, the pool of capital is smaller and the appetite for risk may not be as high. So you might find yourself having to pitch to US investors, which can be a daunting prospect.
Especially if you're not familiar with the US investment landscape with the expectations of Silicon Valley. With the whole culture of pitching and fundraising, it can be a very different world.
It's a different game entirely, and it's a game that many UK startups, despite their talent and innovation, struggle to win.
And that's where the superstar company dilemma really comes into play.
Yeah.
Because if the UK can't keep those promising companies from being acquired by US giants, they'll never be able to build their own Silicon Valley, their own hub of global AI innovation.
That's the challenge they face, and it's a challenge that will require a concerted effort from both the government and the private sector. They need to create the right conditions for those superstar companies to emerge and thrive, to attract and retain the best talent, to build a supportive ecosystem that rivals Silicon Valley in terms of funding expertise and opportunity.
And they need to do it quickly because the global AI race is only accelerating.
Absolutely. The stakes are high and the window of opportunity is closing.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've explored the UK's aspirations in the field of AI, the challenges they face, and the potential rewards if they succeed. We've also delved into the superstar company dilemma and the role of government in fostering innovation. But there's still so much more to discuss. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the potential solutions to these challenges, the strategies that the UK government and the private sector can employ to build a thriving AI ecosystem. We'll also examine the ethical considerations surrounding AI, the potential impact on jobs and society, and the need for responsible development and deployment.
It's a complex ecosystem, and there's no silver bullet solution. But there are a few key areas where the UK could make a real difference. One is talent. The UK has some fantastic universities and research institutions producing world-class AI talent. But they need to find ways to keep that talent from being siphoned off by the big tech giants, many of whom are headquartered overseas.
So how do you do that? Is it about creating more competitive salaries, offering better perks, or is there something more fundamental at play?
It's a bit of everything. Salaries are important, of course, but it's also about creating an environment where people feel like they can do their best work, where they have access to cutting-edge research, where they can collaborate with other brilliant minds, and where they have a real sense of ownership and impact. And that's where the UK could really shine.
Because they've already got that strong research base, that history of innovation. So it's about building on those existing strengths, connecting those dots between academia and industry in a way that creates that vibrant ecosystem you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And that means not just throwing money at the problem, but really thinking strategically about how to create those linkages, how to foster collaboration, how to create a culture that values and rewards innovation.
So it's about building bridges, creating pathways for that talent to flow from the lab to the marketplace, to create companies that can grow and thrive in the UK. But bridges aren't enough, are they? You need the infrastructure to support those companies, the resources they need to scale up and compete.
Absolutely. And that's where the conversation often turns to funding. As we discussed, the UK's venture capital scene is not as developed as in the US. There's less money available, and there's a lower tolerance for risk.
And that risk aversion is understandable to a degree, right? I mean, investing in early-stage tech companies is inherently risky, but if you're too risk-averse, you miss out on the big wins.
Precisely. It's a balancing act, and it's one that the UK is still trying to master. There are some encouraging signs, though. The government has been talking about creating a sovereign wealth fund specifically for tech investment, which could provide a much-needed injection of capital for later-stage companies. And there are some private initiatives as well, like venture capital funds specifically focused on AI that are starting to emerge.
So the funding landscape is starting to shift, maybe not as dramatically as some would like, but there's movement in the right direction. But money isn't the only form of infrastructure, is it? What about things like data centers, high-speed internet access, the physical infrastructure that AI companies need to operate?
That's another critical piece of the puzzle. AI is a data-hungry beast. These algorithms need massive amounts of data to train and operate effectively. And that data needs to be stored somewhere, processed somewhere, accessed quickly and reliably. So building out that digital infrastructure, those data centers and networks, is essential.
And the UK has been making some progress on that front, right? I seem to recall a recent announcement about a new data center being built somewhere in the north of England.
Yes, there have been a few initiatives like that, and they're important. Because it's not just about building new data centers, it's also about making sure that those data centers are located strategically, that they're connected to high-speed networks, and that they're designed in a way that's energy efficient and sustainable. Because as AI becomes more prevalent, its energy consumption is going to become a major concern.
Right. You can't talk about AI without talking about its environmental impact.
Yeah.
And the UK, with its commitment to renewable energy, could actually position itself as a leader in sustainable AI development.
That's a great point. They could carve out a niche for themselves, not just by competing on raw computing power or investment capital, but by focusing on building an AI ecosystem that's environmentally responsible, that prioritizes energy efficiency and minimizes its carbon footprint.
And that could be a real selling point, not just for environmentally conscious investors, but for talent as well. I mean, who wouldn't want to work for a company that's committed to building a better future? That's using AI to address some of the world's most pressing challenges.
Exactly. It's about aligning values with opportunity. And it's a message that could resonate powerfully both domestically and internationally.
Okay, so we've talked about talent funding infrastructure, but there's one more piece of this puzzle that we haven't really addressed yet, and that's the role of government. Because it's clear that the private sector can't do this alone. Governments need to be involved, right? They need to create the right policies, the right incentives, the right environment for innovation to flourish.
Absolutely. Governments have a crucial role to play in fostering a thriving AI ecosystem, and it goes beyond just funding research or providing tax breaks. It's about creating a regulatory environment that encourages innovation while also protecting the public interest.
Because there's this tension, right, between fostering innovation and regulating it.
Yeah.
Between encouraging companies to move fast and break things while also ensuring that they're not breaking things that shouldn't be broken.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act, and it's one that the UK government is still grappling with. As we discussed earlier, they've taken a more hands-off approach to AI regulation than the EU, for example. They're betting on agility and flexibility, hoping to attract companies that are put off by what they see as the EU's more burdensome approach.
But isn't there a risk that a less regulated approach could lead to a race to the bottom, where companies cut corners on things like safety and ethics in order to gain a competitive edge?
There's definitely that risk. And it's something that the UK government will need to watch closely. They'll need to find ways to encourage innovation without sacrificing important values, without creating a Wild West environment where anything goes.
And that's where things get really tricky. Right? Because how do you define those boundaries, those red lines that you don't want companies to cross? How do you regulate AI in a way that promotes responsible development without stifling innovation?
It's a complex question with no easy answers. It requires a deep understanding of the technology, of its potential benefits and risks, and of the ethical and societal implications involved. It also requires a willingness to engage in open and honest dialogue with all stakeholders, with the tech industry, with researchers, with civil society, with the public at large.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about the UK's economic competitiveness. It's about shaping the future of AI in a way that benefits humanity,
Mm.
in a way that aligns with our values and aspirations. And that's a conversation that needs to happen at a global level.
I completely agree. The UK's quest for AI leadership is important, but it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. We need to be thinking about the big picture, about the impact of AI on society as a whole, and about how we can ensure that this technology is used for good, that it's used to solve problems, to improve lives, to create a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, the opportunities, the role of government, the need for global conversation about AI. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the UK's chances of actually achieving its goal of becoming a global leader in AI. Is it a realistic ambition, or are they just setting themselves up for disappointment?
Well, as with anything in life, there are no guarantees. The UK faces some stiff competition, not just from the US and China, but from other countries like Canada, France, and Germany, all of whom are investing heavily in AI and making significant strides. But the UK does have some advantages. They have a strong research base, a vibrant tech community, and a government that's at least rhetorically committed to making AI a national priority.
So they have the potential, the building blocks are there, but they need to execute. They need to translate that potential into concrete action, into
Oh,
a coherent strategy that can deliver results.
exactly. They need to make some tough decisions. They need to invest wisely. They need to create a regulatory environment that strikes the right balance between innovation and responsibility. And they need to do it all while navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. It's a tall order, but it's not impossible.
Sounds like their success will depend on a lot of factors, many of which are outside of their control.
That's true. The global AI landscape is constantly shifting. New technologies are emerging, new players are entering the game. The UK will need to be agile, adaptive, and willing to take risks if they want to stay ahead of the curve.
And they'll need to find a way to differentiate themselves, to carve out a niche that allows them to compete with the big players, even if it means focusing on areas where they have a unique advantage, like responsible AI development or sustainable AI solutions.
Absolutely. It's about playing to their strengths, finding their lane, and making a compelling case for why the world should look to the UK for leadership in AI.
Okay, so we've talked about the UK's aspirations, the challenges they face, and the potential solutions. But let's zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture. What does the rise of AI actually mean for the future of work? Because that's a question that's on a lot of people's minds. I mean, we're already seeing AI automating tasks that were once done by humans. What happens when those tasks become entire jobs?
It's a question that we're all grappling with, and it's one that doesn't have easy answers. There's no doubt that AI is going to have a significant impact on the labor market. Some jobs will be automated away entirely, others will be transformed, and new jobs will be created that we can't even imagine today.
It's that uncertainty that's unsettling for a lot of people. They hear all this talk about robots taking our jobs, about AI replacing humans. And it's hard not to feel anxious about that, especially if you're in a profession that seems particularly vulnerable to automation.
That anxiety is understandable. But it's important to remember that this isn't the first time we've faced this kind of technological disruption. Throughout history, new technologies have come along that have displaced workers, that have changed the nature of work.
Like the Industrial Revolution, for example.
Hmm.
It completely transformed the way we lived and worked. And it led to a lot of social upheaval, a lot of hardship for those whose livelihoods were displaced. But it also led to new opportunities, new industries, and a higher standard of living for many.
Exactly. And while the transition can be painful, history has shown that we are capable of adapting, of finding new ways to work, new ways to create value. And I believe that the same will be true with AI.
So you're optimistic that we can navigate this transition successfully, that we can harness the power of AI for good, that we can create a future where everyone benefits from this technological revolution.
I am cautiously optimistic, but it's going to require a conscious effort on all our parts. We need to be proactive, we need to be forward thinking, we need to invest in education and retraining, and we need to create social safety nets that protect those who are most vulnerable to displacement.
It sounds like we need to be having a much broader conversation about the future of work, about the kind of society we want to create in the age of AI.
Hmm.
It can't just be about maximizing efficiency and productivity. It has to be about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, to contribute, to live a meaningful life.
I couldn't agree more. The choices we make today will shape the future of work, the future of our society. And it's crucial that we make those choices with our eyes wide open, with a clear understanding of the potential benefits and risks of AI, and with a commitment to creating a future that works for everyone.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about the impact of AI on the labor market, the need for proactive policies and social safety nets, and the importance of a broader conversation about the future of work. But I want to touch on another aspect of AI that's generating a lot of discussion and debate, and that's the ethical implications of this technology.
It's a critical conversation to be having. As AI becomes more powerful and more pervasive, we need to be thinking carefully about how to ensure that it's used responsibly, that it doesn't perpetuate existing biases, and that it doesn't erode our privacy or autonomy.
Because there are some real concerns out there, right? About
Yeah.
things like algorithmic bias, where AI systems reflect the biases of the data they're trained on, potentially leading to unfair or discriminatory outcomes, or about the use of AI in surveillance systems, which could erode our privacy and civil liberties.
Those are valid concerns, and they highlight the need for ethical frameworks, for guidelines and regulations that ensure that AI is developed and deployed in a way that aligns with our values.
Because if we're not careful, we could end up creating a world where AI exacerbates existing inequalities, where it undermines our fundamental rights, where it becomes a tool of oppression rather than liberation.
That's the dystopian scenario that we need to avoid. And it's why it's so crucial that we're having these conversations now, that we're bringing ethical considerations to the forefront of the AI development process, and that we're creating mechanisms for accountability and oversight.
It seems like there's a growing consensus that we need to be proactive, that we can't just wait and see what happens with AI,
Right.
that we need to be shaping its development in a way that aligns with our values.
Absolutely. The future of AI is not predetermined. It's something that we're actively creating through our choices, our actions, and our policies. And it's up to all of us to ensure that we create a future where AI benefits humanity, where it enhances our lives, and where it helps us solve some of the world's most pressing challenges.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive. We've explored the potential solutions to the challenges facing the UK's AI ambitions, the role of government, the impact on the future of work, and the ethical implications of this technology. It really feels like we're at a crossroads with AI, where its potential is so vast. But so are the potential pitfalls. It's both exciting and a bit unnerving.
It is, it's a sentiment I think a lot of people share. We're in this unique moment where we have this incredibly powerful technology that's evolving at an unprecedented pace, and we're still trying to figure out how to harness its power for good while mitigating the potential risks.
It feels like every day there's a new breakthrough, a new application, a new headline about AI. It's hard to keep up, and it's even harder to know what it all means for our future.
It's true. It's a rapidly evolving landscape, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations to engage in informed debate and to really think critically about the choices we're making today and how they will shape the world of tomorrow.
One of the things that keeps coming up in those conversations is the idea of AI regulation. As we've discussed, different countries are taking different approaches. Some, like the EU, are opting for stricter, more comprehensive regulations. Others, like the UK, are taking a more hands-off approach, betting on agility and flexibility.
Right. And there are valid arguments to be made on both sides. Those who advocate for stricter regulations argue that they're necessary to protect the public interest, to ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly. They point to concerns about things like algorithmic bias, job displacement, and the potential for misuse in areas like surveillance or autonomous weapon systems.
And those are legitimate concerns, right?
Mm.
We've already seen examples of AI systems perpetuating existing biases leading to unfair or discriminatory outcomes. And as AI becomes more powerful and more integrated into our lives, Those risks only amplify.
Exactly. And that's why many people believe that we need clear guidelines, enforceable rules, and oversight mechanisms to mitigate those risks.
But on the other hand, you have those who argue that overly strict regulations could stifle innovation, that they could create barriers to entry for smaller companies, and that they could ultimately slow down the development of AI technologies that could have enormous benefits for society.
That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that as well. If you create a regulatory environment that's too burdensome, too complex, too risk-averse, you run the risk of driving innovation elsewhere to countries with a more permissive approach.
So it's a balancing act, as we've discussed. How do you strike that balance between fostering innovation and protecting the public interest? How do you create a regulatory environment that encourages responsible development without stifling the potential of this technology?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. It requires a deep understanding of the technology, of its potential benefits and risks, and of the ethical and societal implications involved. It also requires a willingness to engage in open and honest dialogue with all stakeholders, with the tech industry, with researchers, with civil society, with the public at large.
It feels like we're still in the early stages of that dialogue, that we're still trying to figure out what the rules of the road should be for AI.
We are, and it's a conversation that needs to happen at a global level.
Hmm.
Because AI doesn't respect national borders. The decisions we make in one country will have implications for the rest of the world.
That's an important point. We can't just have individual countries going their own way, creating their own patchwork of regulations. We need some level of international coordination, some shared understanding of the principles that should guide the development and use of AI.
I agree. We need a global conversation about AI, one that involves all stakeholders, that takes into account the diverse perspectives and values of different cultures and societies, and that ultimately leads to a set of principles and guidelines that can ensure that AI is used for good, that it benefits humanity as a whole.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about the need for regulation, the challenges of striking that balance between innovation and responsibility, and the importance of a global conversation about AI. But I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something that's been on my mind lately. And that's the role of education in all of this.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle. As AI becomes more integrated into our lives, our education systems need to adapt. We need to be equipping our students with the knowledge and skills they'll need to thrive in a world where AI is ubiquitous.
Because it's not just about teaching people how to code or how to build AI systems right. It's about developing a deeper understanding of how AI works, of its potential benefits and risks, and of the ethical and societal implications involved.
Exactly. We need to be developing critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, and a sense of digital literacy. We need to be teaching our students how to evaluate information, how to discern fact from fiction, and how to engage in informed debate about complex issues.
Because ultimately, it's not just about preparing our students for specific jobs, but about preparing them for a future that's constantly changing, where the skills they learn today may be obsolete tomorrow. It's about fostering a lifelong love of learning, a curiosity about the world, and an ability to adapt and evolve as the technological landscape shifts beneath their feet.
I couldn't agree more. Education is not just about filling our minds with information, but about cultivating a mindset of curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking. And that's what will truly equip our students to navigate the complexities of the AI age.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about the UK's ambitions in the field of AI, the challenges they face, the potential solutions, the impact on the future of work, the ethical considerations, the need for regulation, the importance of a global conversation, and the role of education. As we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the big picture on the potential of AI to shape the future of humanity. Are you optimistic? Are you concerned? Or is it somewhere in between?
It's a question I think about a lot, and it's one that doesn't have a simple answer. AI is a powerful tool, one that has the potential to do both great good and great harm. It all depends on how we choose to use it.
So it's not the technology itself that's good or bad, but the intentions behind it, the values that guide its development and deployment.
Exactly. Technology is neutral. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. The responsibility lies with us, with humanity, to ensure that we use AI wisely, that we use it to solve problems, to improve lives, to create a more just and equitable world.
It's a responsibility that we can't take lightly. The stakes are high. But I believe that if we approach AI with a sense of humility, with a commitment to ethical principles, and with a willingness to engage in open and honest dialogue, we can harness its power for good and create a future that benefits all of humanity.
I share that hope. The future of AI is not predetermined. It's something we're actively shaping through our choices and actions. And it's up to all of us to ensure that we create a future where AI is a force for progress, a force for good, and a force for a brighter tomorrow.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. The future of AI is in our hands. Let's make sure we shape it wisely.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you have an investment portfolio to help you grow your money over time?
Right.
Well, imagine that, but on a massive scale, like for an entire country. That's essentially what a sovereign wealth fund is all about, or SWF for short.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that these SWFs, they aren't just about saving for a rainy day, they're strategic tools that can be used to invest in key industries, boost economic growth, and even influence global trends.
So it's like a country-sized investment fund.
Yeah.
And some serious geopolitical muscle.
Exactly. And the numbers we're talking about are mind-boggling. Take Norway, for example. They've got the world's biggest SWF, worth over $1.7 trillion.
Oh.
To put that in perspective, they made a profit of $138 billion in just the first 6 months of this year. That's more than some countries make in a whole year.
Wow, $138 billion in 6 months. That's a serious chunk of change. It sounds like the U.S. might be a little late to this party right now.
Well, the U.S. has had programs with similar aims, but they haven't always functioned as a traditional SWF. Think about the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. They've been used to invest in domestic industries, but they often operate more like subsidies, supporting specific companies or sectors. SWF, on the other hand, is designed to be a profit-making machine, investing strategically to grow its assets over time.
So it's not just about spending money. It's about investing it wisely to generate even more wealth for the country down the line.
Precisely. And this is where the conversation about a U.S. SWF gets really interesting. There's a lot of talk about using it to invest in cutting-edge technologies. We're talking advanced shipbuilding, nuclear fusion, even quantum cryptology, the kind of stuff that could be game-changing for the U.S. economy and its global standing.
Okay, but before we dive into the potential benefits, I'm curious about how other countries are using their SWFs. I know China's been making headlines with its investments.
Yes, China's approach is a great contrast. They've been using their SWF to fund massive infrastructure projects around the world, some of which have raised eyebrows because of their potential military applications. Think of things like deep-water ports and high-speed rail networks that could be used for both economic and military purposes.
So it's not just about making money, it's about strategically positioning yourself on the global chessboard.
You got it. And this raises some important questions for the U.S. If they create an SWF, what will their investment strategy be? Will they focus on competing with China in infrastructure development, or will they prioritize other areas, like technological innovation or securing access to critical resources?
All right, so we've got this powerful financial tool that can be used to boost the economy, shape global trends, and even counter rivals like China. But I'm guessing there are also some potential downsides or challenges to consider, right?
Absolutely. One major challenge is the potential for political interference. The U.S. political landscape is known for its shifts and changes with each election cycle. This could lead to inconsistent goals for the SWF, making it difficult to achieve those long-term objectives.
Right, because if every new administration comes in
Yeah.
and tries to change the fund's direction, it's never going to be able to achieve those big long-term goals.
Exactly. And then there's the track record of government-led investment programs. There have been successes for sure, like the Department of Energy helping to launch Tesla, but there have also been some high-profile failures, like the collapse of the Solyndra Solar Company.
Oh, right.
So there's a valid concern about whether the government can be trusted and manage such a massive fund effectively.
So the question is, can the U.S. government create a SWF that is both ambitious and well-managed, avoiding the pitfalls of political whims and risky investments?
That's the million-dollar question. Or should I say the trillion-dollar question? There's a lot at stake here. If done right, a U.S. SWF could not only boost American innovation and competitiveness, but also provide a counterbalance to China's growing influence. It's a fascinating development,
Oh,
with the potential to reshape the global landscape, but it's also a complex undertaking, fraught with potential pitfalls.
this all sounds pretty abstract, though. What about the average American? How would they actually be affected by a U.S. SWF?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. You see, 23 U.S. states already have their own SWFs.
Wait, really? I had no idea.
Yep, it's true. And they use them in different ways. Alaska, for example, distributes annual dividends to its residents from its SWF. It's like everyone gets a little share of the state's oil wealth.
Hmm.
And Texas uses its fund to support public schools and universities. So there's precedent for using these funds to directly benefit citizens.
Wow, so there's not just some theoretical concept. It could actually have a tangible impact on people's lives.
Exactly. And that brings up a crucial point. The purpose and objectives of a U.S. SWF need to be clearly defined and communicated to the public. Will it be primarily focused on generating financial returns? Or will it also prioritize strategic investments? Will there be mechanisms for distributing some of the profits to citizens? Like in Alaska, these are questions that will need to be carefully considered and debated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it seems like there are a lot of different ways this could go, and the stakes are pretty high.
Absolutely. This is a decision that could have a major impact on the U.S. economy and its role in the world for decades to come.
So it sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack here, and a lot more to learn about how this whole SWF thing might play out.
We do. It's a complex issue, but it's also an incredibly important one that deserves our attention.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued, and I'm sure our listeners are too. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and dive even deeper into this topic. It sounds like setting up a US SWF is a lot more complicated than just deciding to invest some money. There are so many big decisions to make about the country's priorities, its role in the world, and how the benefits would be shared.
You're absolutely right. And one of the biggest hurdles is getting everyone on board. For a US SWF to really succeed, it can't be a political football, changing direction every time there's a new administration. It needs what's called bipartisan support, basically agreement from both major political parties on the long-term goals and how it should be run.
That makes sense. But let's be honest. Washington isn't exactly known for playing nice across party lines. And even if they could agree, how do we make sure this SWF doesn't just turn into another bureaucratic mess? We've all heard horror stories about government programs wasting taxpayer money. How can we ensure this one actually delivers results?
That's where we can learn from Norway's experience. Remember how I mentioned they have the world's largest SWF?
Yeah.
Well, a big part of their success comes down to two things: strict performance benchmarks and management by an independent commission. Basically, they set clear targets for how much the fund needs to earn, and they put it in the hands of experts who are insulated from political pressure.
So it's like giving them a clear mission and the freedom to operate without interference. Kind of like a special forces team for finance.
That's a great analogy, and it works. Norway's SWF has consistently generated strong returns, providing a huge financial cushion for the country. They've even been able to use some of the profits to benefit their citizens directly, like through those annual dividends in Alaska.
Okay, so we know there are challenges, but also potential models for success. Now let's talk more about what a U.S. SWF could actually invest in. We touched on emerging technologies, but what other possibilities are out there?
Think bigger. On a global scale, imagine a U.S. SWF investing in critical minerals and infrastructure in developing nations. Not only could this yield financial returns, but it would also allow the U.S. to build stronger relationships with these countries and counter China's growing influence in those regions. It's a way to use financial power to advance strategic interests.
So it's not just about making money. It's about strategically positioning the U.S. for the future. Kind of like playing 4D chess with the world economy.
You got it. And there's another benefit that often gets overlooked. A U.S. SWF could actually help to stabilize the global economy by investing in a diverse portfolio of assets. The fund could act as a buffer during times of crisis, potentially preventing a full-blown global recession.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
But all this talk about trillions of dollars begs the question, where would the money for U.S. SWF actually come from?
Well, one option is for the government to issue bonds. This is essentially like borrowing money from investors, with a promise to pay it back with interest. It wouldn't directly impact taxpayers, as the bonds would be purchased by institutions and individuals looking for a safe investment.
That sounds promising.
Mm.
But wouldn't issuing more bonds add to the national debt? I mean, that's already a huge concern for a lot of people.
It's true that issuing bonds would increase the debt in the short term. However, if the SWF is managed effectively and generates significant returns, those profits could be used to pay down the debt over time. In fact, the long-term benefits of a successful SWF could outweigh the initial debt burden. Plus, the U.S. has a pretty solid track record of repaying its debts, which makes investors more willing to lend them money.
Fair point. But even if we figure out the funding, we still need someone to actually manage this massive fund. Who would be in charge? And how can we be sure they'll make smart, responsible investment decisions?
That's why the idea of an independent commission is so important. Ideally, this commission would be made up of experts in finance, economics, and international relations, people with impeccable credentials, and a deep understanding of global markets. Their job would be to set the fund's investment strategy and make sure it's aligned with those long-term national goals we talked about earlier.
So it's like assembling a dream team of financial masterminds. But even with the best and brightest in charge, wouldn't there still be a risk of political pressure influencing their decisions? I mean, we're talking about a lot of money and a lot of power here.
Of course, that risk always exists. That's why it's crucial to build in safeguards to ensure the Commission's independence. Things like fixed terms for commissioners, limits on their ability to hold other government positions, and strict transparency requirements for all investment decisions.
So it's all about setting up the right checks and balances, like having a referee to make sure the game is played fairly. But at the end of the day, isn't a U.S. SWF still a bit of a gamble? I mean, there's no guarantee it'll be successful.
Right. That's true. There are no guarantees in investing, especially on this scale. But if you think about it, the U.S. is already making big bets on its future all the time. Investing in education, infrastructure, research and development. These are all forms of investment, just like an SWF. The key difference is that an SWF is specifically designed to generate a financial return, which could then be used to fund those other important priorities.
So it's like creating a separate engine for economic growth that could power the whole machine.
Exactly. And one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole debate is that it forces us to think about intergenerational equity. In other words, how much are we willing to invest today to benefit future generations? Should a U.S. SWF be used to address immediate needs, like providing dividends to citizens or investing in domestic projects? Or should it be focused on long-term strategic goals, even if those benefits won't be felt for decades?
That's a really interesting question. It's like choosing between spending your money now or investing it for retirement. Except in this case, we're talking about the future of the entire country.
Precisely. And there's no easy answer. It depends on your values, your priorities, and your vision for the future. But that's what makes this such a crucial and compelling conversation to have.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of sovereign wealth funds. It sounds like the U.S. is at a crossroads, facing a decision with enormous implications for its future.
You've summed it up perfectly. The creation of a U.S. SWF would be a historic move, one that could fundamentally alter the country's economic trajectory and its role on the global stage. It's a decision that demands careful consideration and a robust national dialogue.
So what does this all mean for the average American? What should they be thinking about as this debate unfolds?
Well, I think the key question for everyone is this: what kind of future do you want for your country? And what role do you think the U.S. should play in the world? Because ultimately, the decision about whether or not to create an SWF and how it should be structured and managed will be a reflection of those values and aspirations.
There's a lot to ponder, that's for sure.
Yeah.
This whole concept of U.S. SWF has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's a fascinating topic with so many layers and complexities, and the choices made now will have ripple effects for generations to come.
Let's move on to the next topic. Okay, so have you ever thought about what you would do if you were suddenly locked out of all your important files?
Yeah.
We're talking about ransomware, and it's a pretty scary situation to be in.
I can imagine.
Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of ransomware, exploring what happens when these attacks hit, the tough decisions people face, and what experts are saying about this complex issue.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting right now is the government's growing frustration with how people are handling ransomware attacks. They're seeing this pattern that's actually making the problem worse.
Oh, what's that?
Paying the ransom. It's almost like we're just adding fuel to the fire.
Right. Yeah, if hackers know they'll get paid, they'll just keep doing it right. But what are you supposed to do?
Well, that's the question everyone's grappling with. One top cybersecurity advisor, Ann Neuberger, she argues that these payments are directly contributing to the growth of these criminal ecosystems.
So they're getting stronger because we're paying them.
Exactly. And the government's not just talking, they're pushing for a whole new approach, including potential reforms in the cyber insurance industry to discourage these payouts.
Discourage the payout.
Yeah, and hopefully cut off the funding for these ransomware gangs.
Interesting. So the government is basically saying, don't pay. But then you have the FBI, who, while officially advising against paying ransoms, also seems to understand the difficult situation businesses are in. It seems like they're sending mixed messages.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. It's a gray area for sure.
Sure.
I was reading about this one expert, Paul Underwood, from the IT services company Neovera, and he was talking about attending an FBI briefing where they basically acknowledged that ultimately it comes down to a business decision.
Oh, wow.
They understand that sometimes businesses feel they have no other option but to pay.
Wow, talk about a rock and a hard place. So what are the pros and cons of paying? It can't be an easy choice.
Well, no, it's a real dilemma. If you pay the ransom, you're potentially funding criminals, maybe even hostile governments.
Yeah.
And you could be facing legal issues later on.
And I bet there's no guarantee they'll actually give you the decryption key, right?
You're absolutely right. There's a huge risk they'll take your money and run. And even if they do decrypt your files, who's to say they won't target you again in the future knowing you're willing to pay?
Oh, gosh. So if you don't pay, what happens then? Is that even an option?
Well, if you refuse to pay, you could be looking at a lot of downtime while you try to recover your systems, potential data leaks, and all the damage that comes with that. Reputational harm, lawsuits, you name it.
Yeah.
Not to mention the recovery costs, which could end up being even higher than the ransom itself.
Really?
Yeah, it's an agonizing choice.
I can only imagine. Are there any real-world examples of how this plays out?
Absolutely. Take the Lehigh Valley Health Network, for example. They refused to pay a $5 million ransom.
What happened? Did they manage to recover?
Well, they ended up having a massive amount of data leaked,
Yeah.
including, and this is pretty shocking, nude photos of some breast cancer patients.
Oh, wow, that's awful.
It was a huge blow to their reputation. A class action lawsuit followed, and ultimately they had to settle for a staggering $65 million,
Wow.
a lot more than that initial $5 million ransom.
Ouch. That's a powerful lesson in the potential consequences of refusing to pay.
It is, and there's another case, National Public Data, a giant in the background check industry. Their response to a potential ransomware attack was slow and disorganized, and there were questions about whether a ransom was even paid. The whole thing led to legal trouble and eventually bankruptcy for the parent company.
Wow.
It just goes to show how important a swift and decisive response is in these situations.
It sounds like there's no easy answer no matter what you choose. So if paying isn't ideal and not paying has huge risks, what are we supposed to do? Is there any way to win against these hackers?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's where things get even more interesting. You see, the world of ransomware itself is constantly evolving, and the hackers are adapting their tactics.
We mean?
Well, for instance, we're seeing a rise in data exfiltration attacks. Instead of just encrypting your files, they're stealing your data and threatening to release it publicly. It's almost like they've realized that companies are getting better at using backups, so they've had to up their game.
That's scary. So even if you have backups, you're still vulnerable.
Exactly. They're hitting companies where it hurts most, their reputation and their sensitive data. And to make matters even more unpredictable, there's been a recent shakeup in the ransomware world. Some of the bigger, more established gangs like ALPHV, Black Cat, and Lockbit have actually collapsed.
Well, that's good news, right?
Yeah.
Fewer ransomware gangs means fewer attacks.
Not quite. It's created an opening for new players to enter the scene. Smaller groups that are in some ways even more dangerous because they're less predictable and don't follow the same rules as the bigger gangs.
So it's like a Hydra cut off one head and two more grow back. What can we do to protect ourselves?
You're getting it. The biggest takeaway here, and the one thing that every expert seems to agree on, is that preventing these attacks in the first place is absolutely key. Paying ransoms should be the absolute last resort.
That makes sense, but how do we actually do that? Prevent these attacks? I mean,
It all starts with investing in robust cybersecurity. And I mean, really putting your money where your mouth is. One expert we looked at, Brian Hornung, suggests that businesses should be allocating between 1% and 3% of their total revenue to cybersecurity, with higher risk sectors like healthcare and finance on the higher end of that scale.
1% to 3%. That's a pretty big chunk of
It
change.
might seem like a lot, but trust me, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what you'll end up paying if you actually get hit by a ransomware attack. And it's not just about throwing money at the problem. You need to be proactive. Things like endpoint detection, which basically acts like a security guard for your devices, and ransomware rollback features, which can help restore your system to a point before the infection, can significantly minimize the damage.
Okay, so invest in cybersecurity and be proactive. Got it? Anything else?
Another crucial piece of the puzzle is having a solid incident response plan. Think of it like a fire drill, but for a cyber attack. It helps you react quickly and in a controlled way instead of panicking and making things worse when the pressure's on.
So basically, be prepared, be proactive, and don't rely on paying ransoms as a solution. It sounds like knowledge is power when it comes to cybersecurity.
You got it. The more you know about the threats and how to protect yourself, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this increasingly dangerous digital landscape. We'll talk more about this in a bit.
Great. This has been really insightful so far. I'm eager to learn more.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these hackers are always kind of like adapting and evolving their strategies.
Yeah.
This shift towards data exfiltration attacks really speaks to their ingenuity, and understanding of how companies are trying to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's like they're playing a game of chess, always thinking a few moves ahead.
That's a great analogy. They're clearly paying attention to how businesses are adapting. They see that more and more companies are investing in backups to protect their data, which is making those traditional ransomware attacks, the ones that just encrypt files, less effective.
So they've shifted their focus to the data itself.
Yeah.
The data is often the most valuable asset a company has.
Exactly. And they're exploiting that fear, the fear of reputational damage, potential lawsuits, and the ever-increasing scrutiny around data breaches. Imagine the headlines: Company X loses customer data in ransomware attack. It can be devastating.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier that some of the bigger ransomware gangs have collapsed. What impact has that had? Is it good news or bad news?
Well, it's created this really interesting dynamic in the ransomware world with those big players out of the picture. It's almost like a power vacuum has opened up, and smaller, more agile groups are kind of like stepping in to fill the void.
So more players, but smaller.
Exactly. And in a way, these smaller groups can be even more dangerous. They may not have the same resources or infrastructure as the larger gangs, but they're often more unpredictable, harder to track, and less likely to follow any established norms or rules.
So even though the big names are gone, the threat hasn't really diminished.
That's right. The landscape is constantly shifting. It's a reminder that we need to be flexible and adaptable in our approach to cybersecurity.
This is starting to sound a bit overwhelming, to be honest. It feels like no matter what you do, there's always another threat lurking around the corner.
I understand it can feel daunting, but remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about how these threats work, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself.
Okay, so awareness is key.
Yeah.
But what specific steps can the average person or business take to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, first and foremost, you have to accept that the threat is real. Don't fall into the trap of thinking it won't happen to me. The truth is, anyone can be a target.
Right, so no more burying our heads in the sand. What else?
Don't wait until you've been hit by an attack to start thinking about cybersecurity. Being proactive is absolutely essential.
Okay, I'm all for being proactive, but where do I even start? What are some practical steps?
Well, it starts with the basics. Strong passwords. And I mean truly strong, unique passwords for every single account. Don't use the same password for multiple sites. And whenever possible, enable multi-factor authentication. It's a simple step, but it adds an extra layer of security, making it much harder for hackers to gain access.
Good old-fashioned password hygiene.
Exactly. And just as important is keeping your software updated. You know those annoying update reminders that pop up all the time?
Oh, yeah.
Don't ignore them. Those updates often contain vital security patches that fix known vulnerabilities that hackers could exploit.
So those updates are actually important. Who knew?
They are. It's also a good idea to consider investing in reputable security software, like antivirus and anti-malware programs. They can help detect and block threats before they can do any damage.
Okay, what about backups? You mentioned earlier that hackers are increasingly targeting data directly. Are backups still an effective strategy?
Backups are more important than ever, but they need to be done correctly. Regular backups, stored offline or in a secure cloud service, can be an absolute lifesaver if you are hit by a ransomware attack.
So even if hackers steal or encrypt your data, you have a way to recover it without giving in to their demands.
Exactly. It reduces the impact of the attack and gives you more control over the situation. You're not held hostage, forced to pay the ransom just to get your data back.
It's all about minimizing vulnerability and having a plan B, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just about the technology. Education and training are just as critical. Make sure you and your employees are aware of the different types of cyber threats, how they work, and how to spot them before it's too late.
You mean things like phishing emails, suspicious links, that kind of stuff?
Exactly. Being able to recognize those red flags can prevent many attacks from ever happening. It's like having a strong immune system for your digital life.
So it sounds like a multifaceted approach is the best defense.
Yeah.
There's no single magic bullet solution, right?
You got it. It's about layers of protection, combining technology, training, and awareness. Think of it as building a fortress around your data.
So it sounds like we all need to become cybersecurity experts these days.
Well, yeah, in a way. But, it's not as overwhelming as it might sound. The key is to just start with awareness and build from there.
So what you're saying is we should all be a little bit paranoid.
Not paranoid, but definitely cautious and
And
informed.
right.
Don't click on anything you're not absolutely sure about. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Good advice for life in general, I'd say.
You got it. And remember, in the digital world, the threats are constantly evolving. And the stakes can be incredibly high, but knowledge is power.
We've covered a lot of ground here today. It's clear that ransomware is a complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, it really is. And it's something that we all need to be paying attention to because the threat is real and it's only going to become more sophisticated over time.
So what's the outlook? Are we doomed to an endless cycle of ransomware attacks?
I wouldn't say doomed. It's a significant challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. We've seen progress in terms of awareness, prevention, and law enforcement efforts.
So there's hope.
Absolutely. But it's going to take a collective effort. Individuals, businesses, and governments all need to work together to create a more secure digital environment.
So it sounds like we all have a part to play.
We do, and it all starts with education, awareness, and a commitment to taking cybersecurity seriously.
Well, this deep dive has been fascinating, and at times a bit unsettling.
It has, but I believe that by understanding the threats and taking the right steps to protect ourselves, we can mitigate the risks and create a safer digital future for everyone.
You've given us a lot to think about. Ransomware is clearly a problem that's not going away anytime soon.
You're absolutely right, but it's a problem we can address head-on. By working together and staying informed, we can stay ahead of the curve and protect ourselves from these evolving threats.
On that note of cautious optimism,
Perhaps with a dash of realism mixed in as well.
Arnett, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll